What does it mean to live in a secular age? How did we get here? And what does secularity really mean? Taylor's goal isn't to debate whether belief in God is valid or not, but rather to explore how and why our beliefs and social context have shifted over the centuries. He challenges us to think about secularity beyond just the decline of religion and instead looks at how people find meaning in different ways today. To help us understand, Taylor defines three distinct types of secularity. Secularism 1, a society where religious belief is separated from public institutions. Secularism 2, a decline in religious belief and practice among individuals. Secularism 3, the sense in which belief in God is now one choice among many. In this book, Taylor is particularly focused on Secularism 3. He argues that in modern Western society, belief has moved from something that was almost inevitable to something that's a choice among countless other ways of understanding the world. So how did we get here? Taylor describes this transformation as the great disabetting. Over centuries, society gradually shifted from a tightly knit community of belief to an individualized, rationalist way of thinking. We became buffered individuals, separated from this enchanted sense of the universe. Taylor begins by exploring the idea of bulwarks of belief, or the social, cultural, and intellectual structures that made belief in God almost unquestionable in pre-modern times. He explains how, for centuries, belief in God was taken for granted because of an enchanted world filled with spirits, demons, and a divine order. This worldview created a natural sense of unity between the spiritual and material worlds, where daily life and religious life were seamlessly integrated. Key societal institutions, family, church, and community, reinforced this belief as the norm, and unbelief was almost unimaginable. Taylor outlines the historical shift toward what he calls the disciplinary society. As Europe transitioned out of the medieval period, Protestant reformers like Martin Luther pushed for a more personal and disciplined relationship with God. Religious practices became more inwardly focused, emphasizing individual moral reform over collective religious rites. Taylor argues that this shift laid the groundwork for a more disenchanted view of the world, where external religious symbols and rituals became less central and personal interfaith took precedence. Taylor introduces the concept of the Great Disabetting, describing how people gradually move from a communal, embedded sense of self where individuals were closely tied to community and the cosmos to a more individual, buffered self. This shift allowed people to conceive of themselves as separate from the world around them and capable of making independent choices about belief. This disabetting also changed the nature of society, with social order increasingly based on contracts and individual freedoms rather than divine or communal mandates. Taylor discusses the emergence of modern social imaginaries, shared social understandings that shape people's worldview. During this period, new social imaginaries began to replace religiously grounded ones. Concepts like individual rights, democracy, and the nation-state emerged, fundamentally altering how people related to each other and to the divine. These new imaginaries emphasized the value of human agency, economic progress, and political rights, all of which reinforced the idea that individuals could live meaningful lives apart from traditional religious frameworks. Finally, Taylor explores how the growth of secular ideas and the disenchanted view of the world began to challenge religious belief itself. He refers to this as the specter of idealism, the growing notion that meaning and morality might come not from God, but from human ideals and reason alone. This secularizing shift did not remove the possibility of belief, but made unbelief a viable option. Taylor explains that this opens up a new kind of moral space in which people could choose belief, unbelief, or alternative spiritualities. Now we delve into the rise of providential deism, a religious perspective that gained popularity during the Enlightenment. Providential deism posited a distant, rational God who created the universe but did not intervene in human affairs directly, a departure from the active, personal God central to earlier Christianity. This view saw the universe as a kind of machine governed by natural laws, with God as the initial creator who then stepped back. Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and John Locke promoted this idea, arguing that the natural world was a reflection of God's wisdom and could be understood through reason and science. The significance of providential deism lay in its emphasis on human reason and natural law over religious mysteries and miracles. Taylor argues that this shift was pivotal in transforming religious belief from a communal, embodied practice into a set of rational principles. In this worldview, morality was based less on divine command and more on human welfare and the order of nature. This shift made it possible to view morality and purpose as something independent of a personal God, contributing to the gradual secularization of ethics. With the rise of science and the Enlightenment's focus on reason, society began to view the universe as governed by impersonal, predictable laws rather than by divine intervention. This mechanistic understanding of the world minimized the role of God in everyday life, positioning human beings as autonomous agents within a predictable, rational universe. Taylor argues that this shift brought about a new social imaginary, one that emphasized individual freedom and self-determination rather than religious dependence. Human beings now saw themselves as capable of ordering society and achieving progress without relying on religious structures or beliefs. This contributed to what Taylor calls exclusive humanism, a framework in which humans can find purpose, meaning, and moral direction without reference to the divine. This development, Taylor notes, was essential for the rise of secularism in the West, as people began to see secular morality and social order as valid alternatives to religious life. In Chapter 8, Taylor explores what he calls the malaises of modernity. He explains that, while modern secular society has brought about greater freedom and individual choice, it has also led to feelings of disorientation, fragmentation, and alienation. This is due to the loss of a unified, shared framework for understanding meaning, purpose, and morality. Many people find themselves in what Taylor describes as an anonymous and impersonal world, lacking the sense of belonging and community that traditional religion often provided. Taylor argues that these malaises have created a sense of moral hunger or something more fulfilling than what a purely secular life can offer. This dissatisfaction has pushed people to search for new sources of meaning, opening the door for alternative spiritualities, self-help movements, and various other forms of self-discovery that attempt to fill the existential gap. Here, Taylor describes the crisis of meaning that arose with modern secularization. As people moved away from traditional religious structures, some began to confront a sense of existential emptiness, which he calls the dark abyss of meaninglessness, with no overarching religious narrative to provide a sense of purpose. Individuals were forced to create their own meanings and identities, which could be both liberating and burdensome. For some, this led to nihilism, the belief that life lacks inherent meaning, while others sought alternative frameworks for finding significance. Taylor argues that this abyss of meaninglessness is a critical challenge in the secular age, as it pushes people to seek out new beliefs, ideologies, or spiritual practices. The rise of existentialism and the increased interest in meditation, self-help, and even political ideologies all reflect this search for meaning in a disenchanted world. The expanding universe of unbelief, a phenomenon where atheism and agnosticism became not only possible, but widespread in Western society. He explains that as secularism grew, so did the diversity of non-religious worldviews, including atheistic humanism, naturalism, and secular ethics. For the first time, people could choose a moral and meaningful life without reference to any transcendent or supernatural dimension. This expansion of unbelief, according to Taylor, didn't eradicate religion, but rather transform the landscape of belief, making it one of many options. He notes that this has created a new kind of pluralism, where belief and unbelief exist alongside each other. The rise of secularism, he argues, did not replace religion with a single worldview, but rather opened up a space for a broad spectrum of beliefs. Now Taylor traces how the ideas discussed in earlier chapters, such as the focus on individual meaning-making and secular ethics, played out during the 19th century. He describes how Romanticism, a cultural and intellectual movement of the time, responded to the cold rationalism of the Enlightenment by emphasizing emotion, nature, and individual experience as sources of meaning. Romanticism inspired new ways of connecting to the world that were not rooted in traditional religion, but still deeply spiritual. Taylor shows how this period brought about new beliefs and ways of living that blended both religious and secular ideas. Some people redefined religious traditions to make them more compatible with modernity, while others pursued spirituality through art, nature, or philosophy. This chapter illustrates how the 19th century was a time of experimentation, where people sought ways to reconcile their need for meaning with the new secular frameworks of their age. Taylor opens this chapter by discussing the age of mobilization, a period in which people were encouraged to actively reshape society in alignment with various ideological projects, whether religious or secular. This era, spanning roughly the 19th and early 20th centuries, saw many Western societies undergoing political, social, and economic reforms. Some movements aim to reinforce traditional religious values, while others promoted secular, nationalist, or socialist ideals. Taylor argues that during this time, people increasingly began to see themselves as autonomous agents, who could shape their own lives and values. Religion, for many, became less about communal obligation and more about personal conviction or identity. This shift enabled new forms of both belief and unbelief, contributing to a sense of agency and religious choices that set the stage for today's pluralistic landscape. The age of authenticity, which he associates with the latter half of the 20th century and continuing into today. This period emphasizes the importance of individual expression, personal experience, and authenticity. People increasingly seek to find and express their true selves rather than conforming to traditional social roles or external authorities, whether religious or secular. Taylor argues that in this era, people are encouraged to seek a form of spirituality or morality that resonates personally, regardless of whether it aligns with traditional religious doctrines. This shift has led to a variety of individualized spiritual practices and belief systems, where individuals mix and match elements from different traditions to suit their personal sense of authenticity. The result is a society where religious belief is one of many ways to pursue meaning and fulfillment, and where people are more open to experimenting with different worldviews. Here Taylor introduces the concept of the immanent frame, a key idea for understanding modern secularism. The immanent frame is a way of viewing the world that focuses exclusively on natural, human-centered explanations, excluding any supernatural or transcendent perspectives. This outlook has become dominant in secular societies, where people tend to explain reality in terms of science, reason, and human agency, without necessarily invoking religious or metaphysical concepts. However, Taylor argues that this frame is not inherently atheistic. Rather, it is a closed or open frame depending on the person's orientation. Some people adopt a closed, immanent frame, rejecting any possibility of transcendence or the divine, while others keep it open, allowing for the possibility that there might be something beyond the material world. Taylor begins by describing what he calls the modern moral order, a vision of society based on individual rights, freedoms, and self-determination, rather than divine or cosmic order. This moral framework, which developed during the Enlightenment, shifted emphasis from traditional, religiously grounded values to secular ethics focused on the well-being of individuals and society. This change provided a new basis for moral life that didn't rely on religious belief, making it possible for people to lead morally guided lives within a purely human-centered worldview. From here, the secular outlook has become more widespread, with many people coming to view human life and society in entirely naturalistic terms. The secular outlook frames human experience without reference to the supernatural, emphasizing reason, science, and material well-being as foundations for understanding reality. Taylor emphasizes, however, that even within this outlook, people continue to experience moral and spiritual cross-pressures, the feeling that life may contain more than what secularism alone can explain. This chapter shows how even a secular worldview is not devoid of spiritual or existential tension. Here, Taylor expands on the idea of cross-pressures, the experience of feeling pulled between belief and unbelief, the immanent and the transcendent. In a secular age, people are faced with various tensions: the longing for something beyond the material world, the sense of wonder, and the desire for meaning. These cross pressures create a kind of spiritual fragilization where both belief and unbelief are less stable, more subject to doubt and questioning. Taylor argues that these pressures make secular modernity a complicated space where individuals are continually negotiating their stance toward belief and transcendence. The imminent counter-enlightenment, a movement that pushes back against purely rationalistic, secular approaches to life, advocating instead for experiences that engage the whole person, including emotional and spiritual dimensions. This movement values aesthetic experiences, nature, and practices that cultivate a sense of connectedness and meaning outside of traditional religious institutions. Figures in this counter-enlightenment view secularism as inadequate for addressing deeper human needs, and they seek a kind of spirituality or fullness that is still grounded in the material world, but open to a sense of the sacred. Taylor addresses the various master narratives of reform, broad historical stories we tell about society's progress toward modernity, often implying a move away from superstition or religious authority toward reason and science. Taylor critiques these narratives as oversimplified. They often portray secularization as an inevitable march of progress, but fail to account for the rich and complex interplay between belief, unbelief, and new forms of spirituality. He argues that this linear narrative does not capture the diversity of ways people in modernity actually experience belief and morality, and it tends to marginalize forms of spiritual life that do not fit the secular mold. In the final chapter, Taylor explores conversion in the broad sense, looking at how people undergo profound transformations in their worldview, whether that involves embracing religious faith, shifting to secular humanism, or adopting alternative spiritual practices. In a secular age, conversion is less about moving from one fixed belief to another and more about an ongoing process of negotiation and change as individuals seek coherence in a pluralistic world. Taylor argues that this modern form of conversion reflects the freedom and complexity of a secular context, where belief is seen as a personal journey rather than an inherited certainty. This secular age has brought about a pluralistic marketplace of beliefs, where individuals are free to choose and construct their own spiritual paths. Taylor notes that this pluralism has enriched our understanding of faith by allowing for more personal and diverse expressions of spirituality. Yet he also warns that it brings challenges, particularly the cross pressures and sense of fragility that modern believers and non-believers alike experience. In a world where no single belief system dominates, individuals may feel a persistent sense of doubt or an unfulfilled longing for coherence. Taylor argues that this fragile, often tension-filled condition is emblematic of the secular age, where people are continuously navigating their sense of meaning, morality, and purpose. Ultimately, Taylor suggests that rather than seeing secularism as a post-religious phase, we should recognize it as a complex cultural shift that allows for new ways of experiencing spirituality and exploring existential questions. He concludes by encouraging a respectful dialogue between different perspectives, religious, secular, and spiritual, so that people can engage thoughtfully with the many possible answers to life's deepest questions. This open and reflective attitude, Taylor argues, is essential for understanding and thriving in a secular age. This conclusion reflects Taylor's hope that society can move beyond rigid secular or religious divisions and appreciate the diverse and evolving spiritual landscape that defines modern life.